Zero point 0.5 is rapidly approaching, and it's time to select and prepare your league starter. Only for GGG to randomly post a new ascendancy the day before the start and completely change all of your plans. Over the past few days, I've been looking over the patch notes and deciding what to do. I mostly narrowed it down to two build concepts I want to try in zero point 0.5, the Kalar Martial Artist and Scarred Faith Chronomancer. Let's start with Martial Artist. I made a video before the patch notes discussing some of the potential mechanics to go for in zero point 0.5, and they calculated how far you can get your culling thresholds using various setups. In patch notes, there was one additional change, making culling thresholds for normal monsters 35% instead of 30. That means you now only need 186 increased culling threshold instead of 234 to cull normal monsters from full life. This doesn't make a difference if you're going for the maximum culling threshold build, but if you're only looking to cull normal monsters from full life, it's now possible to do without using Mirror's Oxor Helmet. The Horror's Flight gloves will be able to ramp up to 100% increased culling threshold. You can get up to 60% unconditional increased threshold from the passive tree, at least that we know of right now. Heart of the World rolls up to 25%, and cooling to support gives 20% if you cooled in the past 20 seconds. Combining all of those, you can get just over 200% threshold, which will put your other cooling thresholds at 60% for magic monsters, 30% for rare ones, and 15% for uniques, which are very respectable numbers. With that, you'll be able to turn cooling skills into sort of movement skills, dashing between normal monsters to clear the maps faster. There are a number of them that you can use. The ones that stand out to me are Devour, because it gives you charges and regeneration, and Lightning Warp, because it clears enemies around with explosions and gives effusions, creates shock ground, and can be used for single target with ball lightning. You can also use his Vile Intrusion skill from Unborn Leash Staff, or the skill granted by gloves themselves, or any number of culling skills without movement component, or just strap culling strike 2 support on any skill of your choosing, and obliterate normal monsters across the entire screen without needing to invest into damage. The world is your oyster with this one. I recommend Martial Artist because you will be able to ramp up and sustain the Horror's Flight in any situation, by culling the bells spawned by Hollow Focus, while also getting benefits from doing so, like extra charges and free critical hits for some mechanics. And of course, since this build is based around unique gloves, there is a very good potential with Fists of Stone. Some of the transformations GGG showed off looked absolutely nuts, so I'm optimistic that this ascendancy is going to work well. Other ascendancies you could consider are Blood Mage, because Whispers of Flesh allows you to instantly reduce the life of cursed enemies in your presence to 85%, which technically means that you can call magic monsters in your presence instantly, something that I missed before. But to pull that off, you will have to squeeze every little bit of calling threshold available in the game, at least that we know of. And in my opinion, that's just too much investment, unless there is some sort of powerful farming strategy that is based around magic monsters. Witch Hunter gets Decimating Strike, which removes between 5 and 30% of the monster's life on your first hit. That can be very powerful against bosses because imagine you remove 30% of both the boss's life and then cull it at 25%, which is possible if you go all in on culling. But to my knowledge, there is no way to ramp and sustain Horror's Flight on bosses with no odds other than martial artists, so it makes it very situational. Plus, from what I understand, Decimating Strike won't cull unless the monster was already cullable from full life, and won't highlight for cull skills to jump to. You can, however, cull just about everything non-rare or unique in 2 hits fairly easily, which, combined with Delos Inquisition explosions, might make for a fun mapping build, which is going to obliterate map bosses practically for free on occasion. Now, let's address another issue. You don't exactly spawn on the beach with the Horror's Flight equipped on your character. In fact, depending on how rare they are and how hard the Delirium boss is to farm, they might end up being very expensive. So, what am I going to do to get started? I mentioned Mirror's Oxor helmet before, and it can replace the gloves in that setup temporarily. In fact, some may argue it can just replace the gloves altogether, considering you don't need to ramp it, and you can corrupt it for higher threshold. But personally, I see the helmet slot as the second most valuable defensive slot in the game, especially for hybrid ES evasion builds, so I don't like wearing crappy helmets with no stats. But until the gloves are online, it will have to do. With that helmet, all unconditional Culling Strike threshold on the tree, and Culling 2, I can get up to 180% increased Culling threshold. But I'm missing 6%. That extra 6% can come from two sources: Heart of the Well and Corrupting the Helmet. Heart of the Well might also be pretty expensive early on, given that it requires very specific endgame setup to get. So most likely that extra 6% will have to come from Corrupting the Helmet, which is pretty common from what I understand, and I only need to hit a small positive multiplier. Until that is online, I'm probably going to play Twisters, given that GGG didn't nerf them whatsoever. Or maybe Lightning Warp, but with Ball Lightning instead. I have not decided yet. Moving on to the second build concept I'm considering, and it's centered around the updated Chronomancer, specifically the Phased Form Notable. This notable just by itself is incredibly powerful. It straight up mitigates 30% of non-hit damage, and it splits the hit damage into two parts, allowing your recovery to serve as mitigation for big hits. In 0.5, however, Energy Shield is getting a heavy hit to its recovery, so a traditional stack blue life type of setup doesn't synergize very well with this node. In fact, the defense that benefits the most from this node is armor, because taking two small hits instead of one big hit is exactly what you want. Now I just need a bunch of recovery, and there are a number of ways to do that, like just going for big life regen, some sort of leech, which is admittedly getting nerfed significantly, but what I want to look into in this case is Scarred Faith and Guatalitz's Feces. There is this fantastic video by Dreamcore that goes over some of the mechanics and unique items involved, but TLDR, blocking physical damage counts as preventative for the purposes of Scarred Faith and Guatalitzes in the body armor slot. You can then use a number of unique items to enhance these effects to get a very solid amount of recovery. There are actually some new things for this tech in 0.5. First of all, the way Phase Form is worded implies that anytime you get hit by physical damage, 30% of it would count as being prevented, which adds to the recovery. Also, it offers one-shot protection, which is one of the major problems with these setups. Svalin is actually being buffed this week, but be aware that it is an uncommon drop from Olroth, as of 0.4, and you really want the version that has 0% block damage bypass, so it's a late game upgrade for this build. To start with, Red Blade Banner is a good option, as it will effectively double recovery of Scarred Faith. Once you get Guatalitzes, Sacred Sanctum becomes a really good option. Also, Wandering Reliquary has some potential. However, for both of those uniques, I would look at what Runeforging does for them. Unless the upgrades are substantial or transformative enough, I would personally just go with a big chunky rare body armor, especially once I can craft a good one. I am personally planning to go for mostly armor setup, utilizing these nodes to get some AS in and some hybrid AS armor nodes on the tree. I'll have to see if it's enough AS to be meaningful, but I really don't need a whole lot of it. About one half of my life pool should suffice. As for damage, it's a Chronomancer. You can always go for some sort of cooldown spell on it, or utilize Red Blade Banner to generate a lot of energy for some trigger setups. But I'm personally not very familiar with how trigger skills work in PoE 2, and I don't like mixing stats too much. If I go for full armor, body armor, and spells, it's two stats that I need to get to be high, and it's not trivial in PoE 2. So I am planning to go for one-handed maces. I am aware that it's very cooked, and it's probably not going to be great for damage. But it's my build. I'm going to do it anyway. You can come up with something else if you want to. Whichever of these builds I end up going for, I will post an update on the first weekend of the league. I'm not going to post any detailed POBs or planners yet, because, well, for one I don't have them, it's all work in progress, but also I encourage you to do some investigation and experimentation on your own. The beauty of PoE lies in its complexity, and there is immense satisfaction to be had in seeing your own ideas come to life even if they don't end up performing on the top level. Build making can be a difficult thing to learn, but you will never get there if you don't start somewhere. So be creative, and good luck on your league start.